So for those of you who don't know what is an investment thesis, it essentially is your guiding light, your North Star, essentially your investment strategy. It really just depends on what research you have done and the analysis that only you could have really built off of that research. It could be a broad and contrarian concept. So for a while there, let me take an example, like just solely investing in underrepresented founders at one point was very controversial. And it was like, is that really a winning concept? But time and time again, we see research studies from Harvard, McKinsey, all that show that diversity actually is a winning strategy. And especially at Republic, we have a focus on diversity. And so that's something that, once contrarian is now something that's widely accepted. And it involves with market trends. So especially when, things happen with, for example, COVID and, how that has accelerated so many trends, especially the future of work. That is something that will also impact an investment thesis. So if you look at the right side, really it's about who, what, and why. So who are you investing in? What's the profile? What are you looking for? What is your hypothesis or unique observation? And then what supporting evidence do you really have around it? And last but not least is why. Right? Why is your thesis right? Why is it that it's so compelling that you will put money behind this thesis? Why has this not been done before? Is it because, your experiences have informed you of insight that, others may not have? Or is it something that was so incredibly futuristic that, people just couldn't imagine it? And then last but not least is why would companies want you as an investor? Remember that in our prior class is really about, choosing a company and then also providing value if that's the type of investor you want to be. But it's also about what type of expertise that you're trying to bring along with it. So why would companies want you as an investor? Why do you really need an investment thesis? There are three reasons here. One is to stay disciplined and concentrated on investment objectives. And so once again, there's so much noise out there. There's so many opportunities. If you go to republic.co, you'll see that there are, anywhere from 30 to 50 opportunities listed, right? But you really want to focus on the areas that you are, you are passionate about, you're sure of. And so that really does allow you to cut through a lot of the noise. Two, quality deal flow from other investors. That's actually key here because, as you know, this entire industry of venture capital is all about network. It's about, getting access to those best deals. It's about also really being known for something. And so that's why when another investor that you might know, it has a deal and is in particularly, for example, femtech, female technology, helps improve women's lives, they're like, oh, I'd send that to Cheryl. And so that's something to keep in mind here. Last but not least, it's a clear indication to startup founders if you are the right investor. As I previously mentioned, you want people to pick you really to be on their team as an investor and be part of their cap table. So your thesis will serve to be your investment game plan. Let's take an example. We actually have here Union Square Ventures, which is a really well-known top-tier VC. And so their investment thesis actually has changed over the course of the years. And so from 2007 to 2010, what they said was that they wanted large networks of engaged users, differentiated through user experience and defensible through network effects. So this essentially was their thesis succinctly as to what they were looking for in order to invest. And through that, they invested in Etsy, Meetup, and our favorite Twitter, which plug, if you want to show us some social media love, you totally can. Sandra, if you can put in our handles in the chat, that'd be great. But that's something that really helped them be focused in terms of where they were deploying their money. From 2008 to 2017, they said as the market matures, we look for less obvious network effects and then more about the infrastructure for a new economy and enablers of open decentralized data. So that allowed them to invest in MongoDB, Carta, and Coinbase. Coinbase is more about, blockchain marketplace. And then at the same time, they had a similar thesis from 2011 to 2019, an overlapping thesis that said enabling trusted brands that broaden access to knowledge, capital, and well-being by leveraging networks, platforms, and protocols. And so through that, they invested in Stash, Duolingo, and So Far. So as you can tell, once again, these are three pretty distinct investment theses, but they were essentially trying to predict and look at what was going to be the future. And so through that, they've kind of whittled it down to these very specific kind of theses that allow them to then go ahead and invest in those later. So now we kind of know what an investment thesis is. How do you start creating one? So here's the approach. It's pretty straightforward, and we'll actually go into each of these in detail in a second. But essentially, one is you conduct initial research, right? So select an industry, and then actually go ahead and use the internet to find it. And then actually consolidating this key information into a report. I mean, it could be a report, when you are in actual VC, you do want to create a pitch deck that really kind of goes through all of these 6 different pillars. So one is overarching trends in the industry. Then it's the macro and micro beliefs and assumptions that you are trying to either support or go against. Then it's the thesis breakdown. So out of all of this research, you set the scene. What is it really that it boils down to? Then it's supporting evidence and insights that, has informed by your experience or through your, maybe your career. Startups that fit into the investment thesis, and then startups with similar capabilities in tangential industries. And we'll actually go into that in a second, but that is all of that research, all of that kind of really developing your idea into this report can really kind of inform you of when you spot that next investment opportunity. So just in conducting initial research, how do you do it? One, you pick an industry you want to focus on. So there are 3 different ways to do that. Either it's something you already have experience in. I've been in fintech all my life. Maybe that's something that I want to explore further. 2 is that you're absolutely passionate about that, maybe ever since you were a child, you wanted to be in education. And so that's something that you might want to focus on and see where the future is at there. And then the last but not least is you have a firm belief of the industry's future, where I think we're all in agreement that future of work is something that has been accelerated by COVID and could be something that, you want to have a thesis on. And so you go and either out of these 3 different ways, you go and choose your industry. Then it's about market research, right? So we list out 3 different sources. So either PitchBook, which is a little pricey, but maybe you might have access to it through a friend or through someone else, which really does give you market reports, information on private companies. Crunchbase is another one that is actually more accessible, and you can go on crunchbase.com. But essentially, it's just business information on public and private companies. And then there's Statista, which is more just about market sizing, and kind of you get kind of macro reports on different types of industries. So here's an investment thesis report structure. We won't say that we won't go through everything, but the main sections are what I had delineated prior. Right. And so this one is more about cybersecurity. If you guys want to go ahead, I feel like this is a money slide right here. So if you want to go ahead and screenshot this, you totally can. We won't be sharing the deck, but we will have a recording of this later. And so that's also something where you can reference it later. But essentially, let's just go quickly through this. If you want to identify main trends, they can be anywhere from political, economic, social, technological, legal, things that are important. Then afterwards, it's the beliefs and assumptions. So what is really your perspective on this? And then creating your thesis, which is the definition of your thesis and why is this an important space? Why should people focus on this now is really key. Supporting evidence, getting all of this data, are these information compelling enough? And then actually picking some companies based off of your thesis, finding those companies and saying, hey, this actually fits within my thesis, or this might be a little tangential, or, there's a startup doing similar thing but in a different industry, and so that means that there are applications of startups in the industry I'm focused on that might be used for others, and so that might be actually something that you can discover along the way. So I will stop there in terms of the investment thesis. I will say constant reevaluation is key, similar to what Union Square Ventures did. They were looking at, the macro events. What are the current market industry trends? Are these new trends actually, should we capitalize on them? That's something that's important. How bad is bad news? Is industry getting too saturated and competitive? And through all of this, does my current investment thesis still hold? So always take in mind what's happening, but at the same time, what's really key is to keep your game plan at top of mind. So don't sweat the small things. Don't get overwhelmed by the current news. Don't lose sight of your thesis when things get messy. Don't fret on the small things, as I mentioned. Really, as long as your thesis is still intact fundamentally, everything else is noise. And that's what really separates some of the good investors from the great investors, is that they have their eye on the prize, and they know that their investment thesis is their North Star. Awesome. So with that, I hope that was helpful. I know you guys are already putting a ton of questions in the chat. Please continue to do so. Please also continue to share social media, love at Join Republic. And we will now turn it over to Sandeep. Sandeep?